and look forward to diving into your questions. We just have some announcements before we dive into questions and topics you want to discuss. And so just a couple of reminders for folks. This is our weekly US and EMEA office hours, and we have this every week from 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific time. And so if you do have other individuals who are interested and have questions, feel free to forward this invite to them. And then we also have our monthly APAC office hours as well, which is on the second Wednesday monthly from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. And so we'll have our APAC session this week as well, later today. And so just want to remind everyone of our different cadences that we have for support. I wanted to remind everyone of our documentation we've been going through and making some updates. We've been doing some add-ons for Python as well, being able to have different code samples and items as well. And so just want to make everyone aware. I'll go ahead and put some links in chat that I'll go through here as well. Wanted to remind everyone that we have some updated releases for .NET and Python. For .NET, we have some updates for our Amazon connector, being able to add factory for customizing OpenAI plugin responses, and being able to have other updates that have been through the community and getting some of your feedback as well. And so if you haven't had a chance to go ahead and look at the latest .NET release, we'd recommend you take a minute as we've just gotten this updated here in the new year. And then for Python as well, we also have an update which goes through and removes the OpenAI plugin and updates the Open API exec and being able to give references to that. We also have an update to our agent content generation for function calling and being able to have assistant by role. And so we have some other Python updates as well. If you haven't had a chance to go ahead and look at this release, we just had that out and I've linked to it in chat of where both of our releases are. There's a couple more updates I have. We have a number of blog posts. So if you haven't had a chance to see in our new year, we have an update on Onyx GenAI connector for Python and walkthrough of that in detail. And then we also have for folks you may have for customers internationally, we have a series that team has started in Korean. And so we have about 4 episodes out and we'll continue that in the new year. So we do have a blog post that details through each of the different episodes in both English and Korean as well. And then finally, I just want to highlight that we have some new Semantic Kernel powered toys this holiday season. So there's some different walkthroughs that Sean has shared out as well. So I've linked to that in chat. And then I finally want to bring up, I know I'd mentioned this in our previous office hours prior to our holiday break, but just want to make sure that folks have the link to our community survey. We're looking to grab your feedback. There are just a couple of quick questions around things that you found valuable, feedback, and what you want to see coming forward in both blog posts and in office hours as well. And so I've linked to that. If you haven't had a chance to fill it out, please take a couple of minutes. If you have, we really appreciate your feedback and looking forward to hearing from you and diving into that feedback more in the new year. So with that, we'll go ahead and turn it over to any questions we have. I know we have a good number of folks on, so we'll dedicate the time to going through things you may want to talk about.
Hi, Sophia. Thanks for offering these office hours. It's my first office hour, so I don't know if how this is organized. If there is like a order of people who or first question ask. So how do you usually?
Yeah, just anyone who puts questions in chat or comes off of mute. So really appreciate you joining and love to hear that you're diving into Semantic Kernel. Would love to hear any questions or things that you want to discuss with the group.
Well, I have a question. I posted it on the Discord, but I didn't receive an answer yet. So I thought since it was just office hours, I thought I'm gonna ask here. I'm using kernel memory with semantic kernel and I'm having problems using it with Quadrant. So can I ask you the question about kernel memory as well, or only semantic
Yeah,
kernel?
you can definitely ask us. We may loop in our team, Davis and others who they're not on, but feel free to ask. We may have other folks on right now who are able to dive in. So would love to hear the question and understand what you're running into.
So the problem is, so I just got started with our kernel memory, and in the beginning I just said like use this simple vector database, and then I did a rect system, and everything worked fine. And then I thought I'm gonna use Quadrant as my backing, as my vector database, and I'm programming .NET Aspire. So I have the .NET Aspire spinning up a Quadrant database, and then I use a kernel memory as a service, meaning this Docker image. And into this Docker image, I pass the configuration. In the configuration, I change from simple vector database to Quadrant database. And it works as before. But interestingly, the vectors never get written to my Quadrant. So it seems as if the settings from simple vector database to Quadrant database are ignored, even though when I look at the logs, I see that the Quadrant memory connector is actually selected. So I'm really puzzled about that. First of all, that it works, and second of all, that it doesn't store my vectors in Quadrant.
Yeah, definitely. That is really odd behavior. Is there anyone on Wesley or others who may be able to dive into that experience?
So yeah, I don't have that much context of kernel memory, but could it be as well that the vectors are not getting generated successfully and it's upserting the rest, or maybe that something is going wrong with the embedding generation?
Well, if I upserting and reading works, so I can upload a document and then ask question about this document. So it works. It just doesn't store my vectors in my database, even though it should. So I just have to assume that that still this internal simple vector database is used instead of my Quadrant. And I mean, the documentation is missing many parts. So, but as far as I understand, each vector upsert should use the tag as a record collection. So if the record collection is not established, so I would assume that kernel memory creates this record collection for me. And this isn't the case. So if I look at my Quadrant database, I don't see any record collections created.
Oh, right. So it's completely empty, the database.
It's completely empty, yes.
And yet it's still working from a consumption perspective.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely, it sounds like what you're saying makes sense in terms of it still using the old one. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't know that much about kernel memory. I work on Semantic Kernel's vector store side, so I have a lot of context of that, but not so much on kernel memory.
Yeah, I was long going back and forth. Should I use the semantic kernel vector stores or the kernel memory, and then kernel memory can ingest like websites, Word documents, PDFs, and then I clearly decided for the kernel memory because I need Word documents and so on. So this would save me a lot of time. I'm just puzzled by that. So do you think would it be good to file an issue or at the kernel memory repository or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I would recommend, I'll go for Wesley.
Sorry, I was just going to say, definitely it makes sense. You know, so we can definitely ask the folks who work there on that, who's primarily focused on that to help look at that as well. Sorry, Sophia, you were going to say as well.
No problem, was I just copied your email, so I'll also start an email with the kind of lead of kernel memory, but if you go ahead and file an issue in their repository as well, that'd be a great way to proceed, but I'll also start an email for you to discuss with them further.
Yeah, okay, so I'll file an issue then.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the question, and love to hear that you're diving into semantic kernel. And so as you have other questions or items that come up, feel free to put them in our, we usually, for some of our triage, and we go through GitHub discussions, but we also look through Discord. And so I'll definitely go through and see where your question is to be able to flag to our team. And then also feel free to always join our office hours for questions you may have. So thank you so much. I'm not seeing anything in chat. Actually, I'm just seeing one that did pop up. There's a update ask around process framework. Ben, is there any updates you want to share out around our process framework?
Good question. I don't think we have anything new to talk about today. Probably by next week or the week after, we will have some updates. New things coming up.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. Brett, did you have a specific item that you're working on with process framework that you're wondering about? I'd love to kind of understand a little bit more of what you're looking for, and we could be able to get some of those updates for you next week.
Nope, no specific questions on my end. Yeah, I haven't actually dove in and tried it out myself yet. I have just read some of the blog articles. So I was just curious if there was any updates or new developments there that would push me to actually go in and give it a try, but I'll wait for those updates in the coming weeks here.
Perfect. Yeah, I look forward to diving into it next week. And if you have any questions as you're looking through and starting to dive in as well, please let us know. Thank you so much. Other questions folks may have, feel free to come off of mute.
Well, if nobody else, the documentation of kernel memory and semantic kernel is not like really complete yet. Did I not find a place where you put the, or is there a place where you just like have like a work in progress documentation, which might be more than the official one, but not quite ready yet for public release, or?
Yeah, thanks for the question, for the feedback there. What we've really been working on is going through our semantic kernel updates and going through all of our documentation. Their kernel memory is a sister team, and so they have separate documentation. But I know Wesley, I see, has come off mute. So Wesley, if there's anything further that you want to add around documentation, I'll turn it over to you.
I'll just add a link to on chat to the vector store connectors documentation. We've spent quite a bit of time making that reasonably complete. So, but if you find any gaps in that, feel free to shout and either log an issue or come and tell us about it here if there's anything else we can add to that documentation that you may need to know more about. We are working on it to make it better. Pretty much as soon as we write something, we push it out. We typically don't wait. So it's not like we have some sort of massive private set of docs that are waiting to go, unfortunately. But yeah, if there's anything specific you're feeling this is hampering my progress, please shout and we can try and prioritize that as well.
The documentation that you gave here is much more complete than for kernel memory. So if I know that there is not a hidden secret place where you put the not quite ready documentation yet, I'll just wait until it's available. And yeah, that's fine. Thanks.
Yeah, and like Sophia said, kernel memory is a sister team of ours, but it's definitely worth asking them as well if you have specific requests for additional documentation there. I'm sure they'd be happy to oblige and make sure to add, because yeah, it is definitely, there's definitely gaps. We know that.
Yeah, but it's in version 0.6, so it's no yeah. I think I'll wait until it's version 1.0 and then.
Cool, makes sense.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the question. I see in chat that there was a question on process framework for the recording. I'll just go ahead and add it. So can process framework support configuring process and steps dynamically for configurations like JSON file? And so Ben has just added in that right now we don't fully support this use case, but would love to learn more. And we're hoping to begin work on that. And so I was just curious, Vaishag, if there's anything else that you wanted to add of the scenario that you're diving into.
Hey, Sophia. So, yeah, the scenario-wise, what we can say is like currently we are looking or we are implementing some use cases with agent framework, and agent framework is little bit not that much deterministic, and somewhat the output is not always 100% accurate. So we used to, or we try to introduce a process framework as well, but process framework is fully code driven kind of approach. So we thought of having some framework to load the process and steps dynamically from a JSON file, so we can configure everything, so we can have a framework ready to build more use cases with fast pace. That's what our thought was. That's the reason I'm asking the question: is there any way to configure the process and steps dynamically, so we can take these cases,
Yeah,
configure and deliver it?
sure. Okay, so I'm curious, are the all the steps that you have, those are kind of static, but you want to coordinate them dynamically with a JSON file? Is it like the actual wiring up of the process? Is that what you're
Yeah,
looking?
not all use cases I'm saying 100% use cases are not like that, but somewhere we would able to do that, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So
Because
if you build,
or in other ways, if I'm comparing, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if I'm comparing with the agents framework what we have today, and if I can create a completion agent and I can fill that, or I can feed that agent to a agent collection or to a group chat kind of thing, and I can continue the thing. So even externally, I can build an agent, a completion agent or OpenAI agent can be built, but and I can add that to the kernel object, right?
yeah.
Something similar to that.
Yeah, so we don't really fully support this yet, but if you wanted to start kind of playing around with it and figure out what it is that works for you, if you build a process, you can serialize it out to JSON, and then you can load it back in from JSON. So if you look at that JSON format, you can probably figure out how you could dynamically create something like that. And that
Yeah,
may work for you. I think like from our side, we haven't exactly locked down what the JSON format is, so it is subject to change possibly, but it could be worth trying at this point.
yeah. So if we see our currently existing agent framework execution was like we are defining our agents and the instructions and all those details about the basic details of an agent in a JSON, and while dynamically we are loading or we are creating completion agent and feeding into agents, right? And invoking the group chat, which means we have an ability to create completion agent from a configuration and we can feed it. But from a process framework point of view, when we are adding some steps or process directly to it, it is expecting a strict class, type class, right? Uh, but
When you're adding
if
steps,
we have if we have an ability to add objects or add from object kind of functions, what we already have in agents, and even in kernel plugins are also having that ability to add plugins from objects,
I see. Yeah. Yeah,
something like that.
we don't currently support adding objects as steps because in a distributed system, that doesn't necessarily work, right, to load objects from memory. So
Mhm.
that's something that we don't currently support. If this is something you're planning on running locally only, then that could work, right? Like an in process. Yeah, we could maybe take this offline. I would love to hear more about the scenarios that you're working on. But yeah,
Yeah, okay.
we don't currently support it.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then I'll have the two of you connect further and as well. And then I see Sean, you have your hand up if you want to come off of mute.
Yeah, I just wanted to pitch a little bit. Brett, you'd mentioned kind of checking out Process Framework. I think Ben was being a little bit modest. There actually is some new stuff in Process Framework. I think our docs haven't been updated. I think that's coming in the next week or so, but there is some goodness. I think kind of as Perstish was talking about, kind of our secret docs are in the repo and in our samples, and it's worth checking out. If if you do want to try, if you have interest in trying the process framework, there are a lot more samples than there were, probably a month or two ago, before most folks disappeared for the holidays, and a lot more information and example processes that you can try out in the repo. So I think now actually is a really good time to try it out. These samples are all running, and looking at them and adapting them, and evaluating them for some of your scenarios and applications. Now is a good time to take a look at it, for sure. I've been trying these out. They're all kind of mostly working great. And I think there's a documentation update coming pretty soon that will kind of flesh this out a little bit more. But there's a ton of information just in the repo if you want to get started trying these out today.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Sean, for diving into that. Brett, I was just curious when you had mentioned you were looking into and haven't tried it out yet. Have you looked through the this part of the repo and the README? I'm just curious from how things are landing and for trying things out if you had a chance to look through that, because I know you'd mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, I believe I had looked through this back in like mid-November, right after it had just been announced. But yeah, it looks like there's a lot more examples in here than when I was last perusing through. So I'll definitely have to take a look and give some of these examples a try. So yeah, thanks for pointing these out.
I mean, if you're in the fast food business, we're ready for you. We got fish and chips, fish sandwich, potato and fries. We're ready.
That doesn't quite align with our use cases, but I'm sure I can find some similarities where I need to.
There's lots of good stuff in here, yeah.
Great, thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean. Any other questions folks may have on process framework, on other items that they're diving into, especially around the holidays? I don't know if anyone had time to dive in to Semantic Kernel fully into different items that we've been releasing out. And so if you do have anything that you've been working on, we'd love also just to hear from you of what you're doing, what you found useful, other things that you may need as well. So I'd love to hear from you.
Hi, Sophia. This is Jeevan. Had a quick question on 2.x release of Semantic Kernel. Is there a good place where we can kind of get a feel of what's kind of coming in next, right? Maybe somewhere in the repo, or maybe your project board where we can kind of see what's coming out kind of before the actual releases?
Yeah, definitely. It's a great question. I am just getting in chat our backlog. And so we have backlog by bucket, which shows all of our items in backlog. But we're also going through our roadmap. And I see that Sean has his hand up, but we're going through and doing some roadmap updates of what's coming. So I'll turn it over to Sean, but I've also put our backlog by bucket in chat. Sean, over to you.
Yeah, I think you basically covered it, Sophia. I mean, I think if you go into our backlog by bucket, that's where our current updated plan is. We are kind of going through our semesterly 6-month plan right now to kind of figure out what it is we want to land for the next few months. I think probably in the next couple of weeks or so, I think that'll be kind of a good topic maybe for one of these community calls, is to kind of provide a little bit of color of what's in our backlog and what we're planning to land over the next 6 months. So we'll definitely do that, with this group. But if you want to see it live, as the sausage is getting made and what's kind of the things that we're looking at in the near future, definitely, everything, all our planning, all our project management is done in GitHub, so you can take a look there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it'll be great if it can be brought in as a topic to one of these forums.
100%. Yeah, I think either like next week or the week after, we'll probably do something like that.
Yeah.
Stay tuned. I'm back for more.
Perfect. Jeevan, is there something in particular that you're looking for or you're wanting to see on the roadmap in terms of functionality? We'd love to kind of capture that now too, prior to our roadmap feedback call with all of you as well.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Sophia, I wanted to kind of get a sense of what's coming, but yeah, if I have something, definitely we'll kind of send it across.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Stephen. Really appreciate the question. Other questions folks may have, or just thoughts too around what they've been working on, I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I've been working on quite a bit because I have some of the questions, like even on the process. This sounds really, really interesting, but what would be the difference? Like, for example, I have a scenario where I know the specific sequence that we need to go through, right? So there is also the sequencing capabilities, because if you want the semantic kernel to decide based on the, let's say, hey, I want to do this, now go figure out all the process steps, versus I know what I want to do. Here is step 1, step 2, step 3. What is the best way so that we optimize, the use of, even like I'm thinking that if you just simply ask a broad question, there could be a lot of back and forth trying to figure out which function to use, what process. What would you recommend if you know very clear, okay, here's first thing I need to do is take this message. Now I need to decompose this. Now then go do a vector search. Now when the answer comes, I want to generate a response. I know all the sequences. What is the best way to do something like that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think a lot of it depends on kind of your process flow, if it's well defined, if it's repeatable versus something that you see a lot of, like you're saying, back and forth and feedback you may need. I do think that it really is a good time to look at the process framework that Sean was sharing out, and all the different examples where you can be able to have different process, be able to come back and forth as well. But I will turn it over to the rest of the team if there is a preference between the two of when to use which flow versus the other. Then I don't know for process of what the guidance would be between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's right. I think if you already sort of know what the steps are and you know what the order of things are, yeah, I think that the process framework is probably perfect for that.
The new one, the
Yeah.
the new framework is, yeah. So so there's not a whole lot of agentic things involved in terms of figuring out what needs to do. But the process is kind of a step by step, right? That's
right. Yeah.
Would you say characterize that? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean,
okay.
the process framework is really designed to, just sort of model kind of well-known, you know, business processes, right? And so if you sort of know what needs to be done and how things need to kind of flow already, then yeah, it's perfect for that use case.
Okay. And just to follow, Sean has something to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to share real briefly. If you I think at a high level, process framework is kind of orchestrating the entire process. And like Ben said, if it's a defined process that you want to be repeatable, that's where process framework comes in. And kind of if you think about it within process framework, like that's where you would have different steps, some of which may be single agents or multi-agents or directly talking to models or even your own arbitrary code or humans in the loop. And so, going back to some of those examples that, are in our repo, you can see kind of more concrete and detailed examples. But I think at a high level, you may not need process framework if you're just doing a multi-agent solution. But if it's a defined process, using the process framework to orchestrate all those steps in the process is where that would come in. Whereas if you think of a multi-agent process, that may be a case where the agent's going to figure out the process on its own. And may come up with a slightly different process than you're expecting, and that may be appropriate for certain situations. Whereas if you want to kind of have things fall lockstep through a particular flow, that's where process framework comes in.
Yeah, what in this diagram, what my concern question is, okay, I don't want agent framework because I know exactly what model and what services and how to inject this. In that case, is the process framework still the things? Because I don't need the agent to figure out what I need to do because I already know. So how would I kind of not having to use the agent framework, but just uses the process to execute this?
Yeah, I mean, within the step, you can run arbitrary code. So I think what you're kind of talking about is, one of these two boxes here in the middle where you're either calling, semantic kernel directly to, access your models and plugins and prompts, or, or executing your own code within a step.
Okay. And is like the thing is like if I didn't have the process framework, what would I have done is I would have just called invoke something with a plugin with a kernel, and then once it is completed, I'll call. Now, what value does process framework add if I'm already doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's a simple process, then something like process framework, might be overkill in those cases. But what process framework
Okay.
does is, enables you to repeat the process, define the process, and then distribute and monitor the process.
Okay.
But if you're doing a simple
And
like
in
RAG
the
flow,
along,
which is I think kind of what you were talking
yeah,
about, then like
yeah.
process framework might be overkill.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's what. And in the same thing, when we do the auto function enable, right? What is the overhead versus when I say and with auto function invoke versus enable the function and then I call the function? Is there when you do auto function, does it do a lot of work to figure out what function to call? Is there more overhead versus, hey, I know this function, I want to call this function. I don't need it you to decide which function to call. What would be your recommendation?
Yeah, if someone on the team has more details on the actual implementation, but auto function calling is done in the model in the service, so that'll be kind of dependent. That in that case the model picks the function to call, and so that'll be dependent on how the model handles that.
Yeah, that's completely right. So like if you want a model to call your function, or like there is overhead in terms of that metadata of that function should be advertised to LLM, so LLM should know about this function. And then this function should be called by LLM. So there is overhead in terms of like a token sent to the model, plus in terms of requests, because like first of all, you need to send request to LLM, and then LLM need to request a function call, and then semantic kernel need to invoke this function and send the result back to LLM. While if you have like a function, an instance of a function, and you for sure know that you need to call that function and you can call that function directly. So like that all overhead I've described is just like gone. So it doesn't exist.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and actually, just to add to what Sergey said, right? You may know that this is the function I need to call, but you may want to rely on the LLM to figure out the parameters that you pass to the function. And so you can do a request to say, here's my context, this is the function, and I want you to call this for sure, and allow the model then to figure out, oh yeah, these are the parameters I'm going to call it with. So that might be a case where you actually do want to use the LLM.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, but if I know the parameter, like at Sean's point, where I know the exact sequence of things, then I don't need it. But if I don't, like what both of you are saying is that there is overhead when you do auto invoke, and if you're certain, then it's better to kind of just make the function call directly.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
LLM is orchestrator. LLM just like it's just reason about the prompt function it has its in disposal, and like deciding which function to call and in which sequence those functions should be called. But like if you know everything yourself, so there is no point in calling LLM.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And I have one
Perfect.
more
Thanks.
question on the. Oh, sorry. Can
Oh,
I?
no problem. That's great, Raj. Would love to hear your next question. Go and dive in.
Yeah. I'm playing with the kernel memory. For it's really good and probably less expensive compared to other solutions. One of my question is like if I use a simple vector DB to upload all the documents to create a memory and then store it in a file storage. What is the latency? Like, let's say when I make the first time, does it load from the file into the memory so that the next time when you ask the question that it answers from that memory, or does it call the file every time when I ask a question?
I'm just looking. I don't see someone from kernel memory on, and so this is something that we can follow up with the team on. I do see that Wesley's on. Wesley, is there anything in terms of some of the memory pieces that Roger was diving into that you'd be able to answer by chance?
I suppose typically with, and I believe this is what kernel memory does as well, is it would typically load the, so it'll take the text that you have that you want to index, it'll break it up into chunks, it'll upload that text into the database plus the the including the vectors. And when you're doing a search, it's searching through the vector store, and typically it would pull out that text from the database at that time. And obviously, there is the other option of like pointing it to a reference. Instead of just storing the text, you can store a reference to the data on file, or sorry, to the original file where the data came from, so that you can read it from there. I'm not sure if kernel memory has a cache where it would cache the data, after read it. Like let's say it was doing reference indexing, so it would just store the vector plus a reference to the original file. I'm not sure when you do a search whether it actually caches reading from disk. So I'm not entirely sure about that, but we can definitely follow up with the kernel memory team to find out more if you want.
Yeah, I think it's worth. Because, Raj, it might be worth asking the question directly on the kernel memory discussions repo. They'll probably be able to help you out most quickly there.
Yeah, I'll ping you the lead dev as well directly, and you can reach out to him directly as well, which he should be happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, because there's also another option, like kernel memory store has in memory also. But what the problem with that is that it has to create the memory every time. Let's say you start a function app or a thing. But then it's really fast. But what I thought, maybe if I put it in a file, and if there's a way it can read from the file instead of regenerating in the memory, that would be good.
Oh, right. So absolutely. Like, the in-memory vector store thing is not super practical for large sets of data. You typically wouldn't use that outside of a very small subset of data that maybe changes frequently or demonstration purposes. It's much better to use like a database like Azure AI Search or Quadrant or something like that, where the data is stored persistently. And these are typically, you index it once and then you re-index when it changes, obviously, but the data is persisted in there. And then you have the choice of deciding whether you want to save the text in the database with the vector, or to store a reference in the database that points to the original file. And the latency that you get will depend on which of those options you pick, obviously.
I think that those are very well documented in terms of metadata, so that I don't have to make another call to get the metadata itself if I embedded it with the vector. But that it won't work if it's really huge. Thanks.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And in the end as well, if you index something, like, it's not probably practical to generate. Well, there's a limit to the input to an embedding model as well, so you can't generate a vector for anything super huge anyway. But also, if you get something super huge, back as a result, feeding it into the LLM will also be problematic. So it's important to make sure the size of what you of your chunks are manageable.
I think that if you're using things like Quadrant, it handles it. Also, even we have some good examples of stepwise embedding, right? Where first chunk it and then create the chunks and then do the embedding also. There are a lot of good options.
And then as well, with regards to indexing, typically the in-memory solutions are fast because it's in memory and there's a limited set of data in there, but most of the databases that are out there would support indexing strategies like hierarchical navigable small world, which does an approximate search. So instead of comparing, well, when you do a vector search, you pass in a vector, and it would typically compare that search vector with every vector in the database, but HNSW allows you to find the closest approximate vectors that are in the database very efficiently. So that also helps with latency, especially if you have very large data sets, very large number of records. So definitely, you want to be switching to a database if you have scale, and you want to be picking one of these, indexing options.
Yeah, I mean, I do use Quadrant and use either cosine similarity or but for there are small cases for smaller businesses where the data is small, that's an overkill. That's why the in-memory store seems to, for particularly where the data repository very small. For we're always thinking about large companies, but there are a lot of smaller companies where the data itself is small, and we don't need to bring all these huge AA search or a quadrant memory or so the use case is for a smaller data set.
Absolutely, and that makes perfect sense. We actually on the semantic kernel side, we've actually, for our in-memory vector store that we've developed ourselves, we actually have some extensions that allow you to serialize what is in memory to disk to a JSON file and then load it up again later. So because it's specifically designed for those kind of scenarios. Okay, good.
Yeah. So, but I thought you're discarding that in memory, the volatile memory store is being moved. It's not anymore available because you used to have a volatile memory store where you can read in a file and load it into the volatile memory store. But I believe it's not available anymore.
No, we've renamed. We used to have, we've renamed volatile to in memory. Let me post a link to it on to the documentation for it on chat, and it's certainly still there. This is now semantic kernel, though not kernel memory. Just to be clear, that I'm talking about.
Yes.
Let me just post a link to it on the chat, and I'll post a link to the extension class as well that I'm referring to, so that you can see what that looks like and how to use it.
Yeah, I think this would be good because we can have a file and then we can load the file into the memory, and then now the response can be much faster, right, when we do the query.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, sorry for just hogging up the thing. Thanks
no worries at all. That's exactly what this office hours is for diving into your questions. So really appreciate you joining and bringing these questions to us. If there are other questions folks may have, we have about 15 minutes left, so would love to use the remainder of the time for questions or thoughts folks have.
I have one request. I'm working quite a bit on the dependency injection with the kernel, but I think we need a little bit more help and clarity on when to use the transient kernel, when to use singleton, when to use scoped things. I know there are some things that say, hey, if you have a plugin, use singleton and then create the kernel. Because I ran into a lot of problems where I kind of used the dependency injection for kernel, and then I tried to use the Bing search plugin, and it didn't work because I had to first register the plugin to that kernel before I could use it. And, so it would be nice if somebody could write a little bit more about how to use dependency injection with some more examples. I know there are some good articles, I think, Sophia, and even you've written some as well with some that home automation, but it still is a little bit murky. So any help in just making it clear, and what is the best way in a scenario where there are hundreds of kernel instances are being created for invoking the prompts, what is the best practice, and some guidelines would be great.
Yeah, I really appreciate that feedback. I know the home automation one we've published quite a long time ago. Mark, is there anything to add on dependency injection as well, and the question that Raj has from your end?
Yeah, I think it'd be useful to kind of get more information on these scenarios where you're kind of getting tripped up, right? If you don't mind, like, could you start something in the discussion area of the repository, and maybe we can just take a look at kind of like, you know,
Yes,
those issues.
I can.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
I mean, I don't know if I would call them issue. It's much more, I don't know if I fully understand it, when to use what.
Sure, yeah.
So it's not like I ran into an issue. And then some of these things won't become visible until you put into production, and where you see there is a memory leak or something is over using transient, which could be performance issue. You know, so it's not very clear what is the best practice, when to do what, and how to like create the service and then create a single time. There are all kinds of examples. It's a little bit overwhelming to kind of see, okay, what's the best way to do this? Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, but
Yeah,
a
I don't
discussion
think
would
that I
help,
run
yeah.
into issues. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, even that list of questions would be helpful, and you know, we could think about putting something in our documentation, or maybe writing a blog post on it.
Okay. Is it possible to have some time with you for me to show you some of the things that I'm doing to get some recommendations on how to use dependency injection?
Yeah, absolutely. That's yeah, feel free to kind of reach out and we can set something up.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Raj. I also put the link to the GitHub to community discussions, where I'd love to be able to have you detail out a bit more of your scenario, what you're looking for, and we can respond there, but also understand, are there additional docs updates or additional blogs to be able to publish out to help with those scenarios as well. So I'd love to grab your feedback. Any other questions folks may have? If not, I'll be on for a minute or two more if there aren't any other questions. But do want to thank everyone for joining in, all of your feedback and questions, and wish everyone a happy new year.
Hey, thank you, Sophia.